Welcome to Backyard Oasis, a podcast designed by and for older adults living in the beautiful Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts and produced in the tech studios at Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Backyard Oasis reaches out to older adults who seek knowledge to help them live more thoughtfully, healthily, and happily, who hope to inspire others with their ideas, and who serve their communities in the interest of the greater good. We hope you join us frequently in our pleasant Backyard Oasis for wide-ranging conversations with a diversity of people who are growing older and want to talk about it.
Hello, this is Judy Raper, Associate Dean for Community Engagement at Greenfield Community College. And today we are at the GCC podcast studio and talking with Brooke Donatone, a local psychotherapist, about a very important topic that can be difficult to discuss, but it's so important. Scams targeting baby boomers are on the rise, and they're not just your typical email phishing attempts to gain trust and take advantage of someone. We're talking romance scams, fake investments, home repair cons, even financial abuse from trusted family members. Older adults have not grown up with the digital tools that younger generations are familiar with, and for this and other reasons are more prone to fall for scams that can be life-altering. Brooke, before we dive into this topic, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you became interested in this?
Sure. So my name is Brooke Donatone. I have a PhD in social work. I've been a therapist, God, I'm feeling old, for over 2 decades. And I have a lot of experience with trauma and working with chaotic families. And increasingly, I've just talked to so many people who say that they can't identify red flags until it's too late. So I've been interested in how red flags affect lots of different generations, but especially baby boomers, there seem to be particular scams targeted towards them. So I feel like it's a really important topic.
Can you talk a little bit about, I think what you said was it's harder for older adults to really identify those red flags, perhaps in part because they grew up with no digital tools,
right? And
also just because of the ways in which they grew up. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I think about during COVID, I was targeted for a scam. I think everyone was, but I'm pretty digitally savvy. I know how to use the internet, and I have a phone. I do a lot of things online. But during COVID, I was ordering food from maybe DoorDash or something like that, and I went to pay, and all of a sudden this pop-up came up saying you had to pay for Google Pay. And I was like, that's weird. But a lot of local vendors were having difficulty with their card machines and things like that, so I thought it was just that. And then I realized my credit card was hacked after I put it into Google Pay. And I was like, wow, if that can happen to me, I can't imagine what's happening to older people. And then I had friends and other people who talked about how their parents were scammed because they accidentally went on a site that wasn't reputable because they couldn't discern the differences between a real site and a fake site.
It's interesting as you're talking about this because I was thinking about just in the past couple of weeks, and I'm sort of on the edge. Like I am technically a boomer, but I was born in 1964, so I'm barely a boomer. And because of my work, I have to use a lot of digital tools. But I can be naive. But I've received a couple emails recently from 2 friends who are both incredibly bright, but in that age bracket, who were faked out by AI, who thought that these interviews they were looking at or something they were looking at was actually real when it made no sense that it would be real. So what are some things that we can do? And I realize that's not necessarily a scam, but in some ways it is. It can alter your perception of the news. It can alter your perception of all sorts of things when you don't know how to identify that. So what are some things older adults can do to discern a scam from something that's legitimate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the kind of scam. And I think AI is making things
really hard,
really complicated, because all the things that we used to have in person that kind of give us that gut reaction that maybe there's a red flag or there's something going on. So when you talk to someone in person, you get a whole bunch of cues. You're getting eye contact and facial tonicity. You might get a feeling from them if someone's like standing too close to you or too far, or all these other things that go into how you perceive a person. You don't have that online when you have this screen. So you can't read all these kind of micro expressions in the same way.
Right. That makes sense.
So I think when you have younger people that are used to living online in a way, they might be able to discern things in ways that boomers can't because they haven't spent as much time online. So I think the way that you interpret information online, even looking at video, is very different than in person.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also like, it was funny because I was talking to I was home last week. My parents are in their 80s. And I helped my father put his car onto Facebook Marketplace. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have his own Facebook account, so I used my mother's. Well, she was a little upset because her assumption is that if you use Messenger at all, you're going to be hacked.
Oh, no.
So, and I was like, Mom, I've used Messenger. I've never been hacked. Certainly there is a strategy by which people hack your Facebook Messenger. So it's like I don't want her to be so afraid of using anything online that it's because there's no way to be in the world today without using technology. Mm-hmm. There's just not.
Yeah.
And so, what advice would you give to older people who might be terrified of using anything because they're afraid of getting scammed?
I mean, I think sometimes even just enlisting help from other people, like, can you help me figure out if this is a reputable person? Mm-hmm. So anytime I do business with any repair person, I look them up online. And if you can't find any kind of digital footprint, that's a giant red flag. Mm-hmm. If you can't figure out who someone is, because it might not be real. That's a major scam.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on Facebook, and that's where I find the most ads that are not legit.
Right.
And I now know enough to I always Google, the question I ask is such and such legit or a scam?
Yeah.
And then you'll find all sorts of information.
Yeah, I got a call from like a debt collection about my business, and I was like, this makes absolutely no sense. There's no debt. Mm-hmm, and then I just looked up, what is this company? And then all of a sudden, all this stuff came up online. Like, this is a scam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I was scammed once by a magazine company, and it took months and months for me to get out of it. They kept sending me bills. They kept insisting I had, debt collectors were calling me. I had never ordered these magazines, so it's really tough. What about given your profession and your experience? What about the psychological impact on people? Once they are scammed, what does that look like? What does the aftermath of that look like? How do they recover from that?
I think it depends what happens, but it can be really terrifying. It almost feels like a break-in, a break into your home, because you're really vulnerable. You don't know how it happened. I think romance scams are a lot more complicated because you have a lot of people that you think they were forming a connection with someone, and it wasn't a connection with a person. They have like all of these people that are working to kind of scam together. And there's different kinds of romance scams that I can go into. But it targets, I think, older people a lot because they're lonely, they want to form connections, and then inevitably they start asking for money, which can be really heartbreaking because they thought that this was real and it's not.
Right. What are some things, particularly with romance scams, and I can see like somebody who's recently widowed or something like that would be particularly vulnerable. And what a horrible crime. What are some things that older adults can do to discern when it comes to romantic engagements?
Yeah, I think, I met someone, like an acquaintance once, and it's funny but not funny. And she was like, oh, look at all these pictures of this woman that I met online. She's a model. And I was like, why do you think those are real? Mm-hmm. Right. And I said, have you met in person? No, it's long distance. She lives in, I don't know, whatever country. And I was like, that's not real. And she kept showing me these pictures that clearly were like cut and pasted. And it's like, okay, so you have someone who refuses to speak on the phone with you, who refuses to meet you in person, and gives you a whole bunch of excuses why you can't talk on the phone or have a video chat. That seems really weird.
But I would guess, and I, being a reality TV fan, I watched Catfish. So I'm curious about, like, I think when you want to believe something is true, it's really hard to have somebody from the outside convince you that it's not. Because if if you're looking for love and you believe you've found it. So what are some strategies you might advise loved ones, family members, friends to use with older adults when they're being scammed, but they just can't face the truth?
I feel like love makes you delusional. It makes you believe things that you want to believe but aren't real. And I think there are a whole bunch of reasons why people ignore red flags, sometimes willfully. So it depends on the person. But I think if you just keep giving evidence like, well, how come they won't meet you in person? Why don't you ask? I'll meet them with you in person. Let's do a video chat together. And just kind of keep pushing, like, why are they not willing to meet? It's a little weird. And also, I think if you bring it in what would you do in person? Because I think older people can see that a little bit more. So, okay, you've known this person for 3 weeks online, you allegedly talk every day, now they're asking you for money. If you just met an acquaintance and you only knew them for 3 weeks and they asked you for money in person, what would you do? Would you give them money? Would you think that was strange? Because I think if people think about an in-person context, they conceptualize it a little bit differently.
And is it always the ask for money that tends to be the telltale sign, or are there other indications that a romantic scam is a scam?
Usually they're looking for money, and they ask for money in really weird ways. You know, I had someone tell me that they met a person online and they have particular kinds of scams. I'm in the military, so I can't meet you. My wife died recently and I'm really sad. They have like particular kinds of scams that kind of pull on your heartstrings and make you feel bad for the person. And then all of a sudden they'll say, you know, weird thing, oh, my car doesn't work and now I can't get to work. Can you send me $300 in gift cards? Why would you do that?
Yeah, well, and those scams, and I certainly fell for this the first time it happened to me, often come from the emails of people that you know or recognize.
Yeah.
I just had this happen to me 2 weeks ago, and it was funny because, not funny, but one of my friends got the same email and got in touch with me and thought it was real and thought it was super inappropriate. It was someone she had just recently started working with, and she was like, "Can you believe this?" And so, you know, I think that anybody who's asking for gift cards, that's a big red flag.
Or anything, cryptocurrency, Venmo, anything. I mean, usually whenever I call friends, I'm like, I'm pretending it's 1992. We're having a phone call now because it's too much texting.
Right.
So just call the person and say, did you send me this email?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you were advising loved ones of an older adult who is particularly vulnerable to this kind of scam, I mean, I don't mean just romance, but any kind of scam, what are some things they should be talking to their loved one about?
In terms of not being susceptible to scams?
Yeah, like how do they coach someone not to be so scared of the world they don't step out in it, but also to be careful?
Yeah, I think that balance is hard depending on how much a person is in the world in person and how much they're spending online, and also being careful with what kind of content they're consuming. So every time, you know, when I talk to my teenage kid and she gives me a fact, I'm like, okay, well, is this an actual fact? Did you learn it on TikTok from a 14-year-old? Because that's not a fact. Let's talk about reputable sources. Let's talk about journals. Let's talk about how you get information, how people convey information. I talk about it like the N of 1 theory, which is every time you do a research study, your N is like the number of people, the number of subjects that you're looking at. So we would never publish a study saying, well, one person did this, because that's not generalizable to the population. So whenever someone says, well, one person said this, I'm like, that's not a fact. That's one person's opinion, subjective experience.
You actually just caused my brain to move to a different place. And it's not exactly like, you know, a one-time scam kind of thing, but we all know that it's really difficult to ascertain truth from fiction when it comes to media sources, especially right now. And older adults are particularly vulnerable. And it can, you know, I've seen this with older adults who are consuming media that is giving them completely, you know, false information. It almost seems like it changes the brain. And there are other things happening that change the brain in older adults. What are some things loved ones can do for someone who might be, you know, falling into rabbit holes around conspiracy theories or things of that nature?
Yeah, it's really complicated. And, you know, there were articles coming out saying that Russia's feeding disinformation to the U.S. and they're literally coming up with fake newspapers with fake histories. So I think older adults that don't really know about media literacy can really fall into that. But every time you have an amygdala hijack, that, you know, Daniel Goleman has talked about this, it's really hard to use logic because the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system kind of can't work simultaneously. So when you're super upset, you can't think logically. So I tell a lot of people, I want you to take a news fast. Don't, I know, and this is privilege, but don't look at the news for a week and just see how you feel. Spend time in the world. Go for a walk, go to the woods, do anything else, learn to crochet. I don't care what you do. Don't look at your phone and don't look at news, because you're going to notice that your nervous system becomes really dysregulated when you're getting upset all the time, because the news is out there to make money, and they make money by how many clicks they get. So stop clicking on it and just like take a break, see how you feel.
So is it almost like you have to take a break to sort of break that cycle? Because I do feel as if people can become almost different human beings as a result of the news they take in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think because you wind up getting more upset about it. And when I talk to older adults and, they tell me information that isn't real, like I was talking to an older man and he was saying things like hospitals are forcing you to wear a mask. And I was like, no, they're not. I don't know what you're talking about, but you should also wear a mask going into a hospital because people are sick. Like that's not a problem. But what are you talking about? People are forcing you. And I think he said he read something online. I was like, well, let's talk about where you read it online, because whenever I go into a hospital, I never see a sign saying we're mandating you to wear a mask. Like just look at the walls.
Right. There was a time when that was
There was
true,
a time,
of course,
but not now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just interesting because, we sort of began this conversation and I sort of approached this conversation thinking about just sort of a one-time intrusion into somebody's life when in fact these quote-unquote scams are messing with our democracy.
Yeah, yes, they are.
It's much deeper than just. So I have another question and then I want to hear you sort of talk about things that maybe I haven't asked you that you'd like to talk about. But one of my questions is around recovery from this, because you mentioned earlier that it's almost like a break-in. And I have felt that. I have been scammed and felt as, okay, somebody has my personal information. It makes me feel super vulnerable to know that person's in possession of my information. Or, like even playing a game on social media that puts your information in the hands of the wrong person. How do you recover from that? How do you regain trust in the world? What does that process look like?
I think it's different for different people depending on their history. But I think when people are armed with more information about how you can keep yourself safe, that's one way of kind of preventing psychological vulnerabilities or feeling like, your trust was breached. So when you think about, are there ways to financially secure your information? Making sure that your computer is password protected, making sure your phone is password protected, making sure that you have extra authentications when, in your financial banking systems and things like that.
Text to your phone, those drives me crazy sometimes.
It does, but at the same time, like whenever I had to put my financial information and it's like, okay, we're going to authenticate, like it's a pain in the neck, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, well,
I'm glad you're doing this.
Right. You're making it very difficult to break in. So if you don't have like multi-authentication, whenever you're giving financial information, you should wonder if that's a scam. Also, like if people are calling you to get financial information, never give any financial information. So I think if you can kind of have steps in place, like if this happens, I won't do that. If this other thing happens, maybe I'll consult with someone. It's kind of an extra layer of like, okay, I think I might be a little more prepared.
One thing I've been trying to figure out is whether or not there are certain browsers that afford you more privacy. And it seems there are. So like Lucky Duck or something.
Was it GoDuckGo? DuckDuckGo, that's right.
Okay, DuckDuckGo.
It's almost like DuckDuckGoose, but DuckDuckGo.
I have that on my iPad, and then I forget the one I'm using, Braver or something on my computer, but it seems like they're harder to navigate than like just the basic, what I mean? I find them hard to navigate, so sometimes I don't use them, but that's another strategy is to try to use browsers that afford you more privacy.
Yeah, absolutely, and you can always go to like a local laptop fix-it place and kind of ask them which browsers. I mean, I guess you can look it up online, but make sure it's a reputable source.
So given your experience and interest in this topic, what are some things I haven't addressed that you think are important for older adults to know or their loved ones?
I think, one thing that gets complicated for older adults is when they have family members that ask for money.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of discerning, like, do I keep giving them money? Do I not give them money? When is it legit? When are people asking too much? So I think that can be really complicated for people to emotionally.
And how do you advise people to navigate that minefield?
I
know it's probably different for everybody,
it is.
But
yeah, well, I think, are you talking about repeat offenders? So, if you have a kid that has like a one-time issue, like they got into an accident and they need help with medical bills, like sure, help them. But if you have someone that's just mismanaging money, it's like, oh, this person, they maybe aren't using money for what they said they're using it for. Like they said they're going to fix their car, but all of a sudden they got a new tattoo.
Right.
Or they're just like every other month they're asking for money, and you're like, well, I can help you create a budget and I can help you do this. And what about a side job? And there's all these excuses why they can't do it, but they keep asking for money. So I think sometimes having boundaries around that is really complicated for people, and saying no and feeling like you're disappointing people.
Well, and it's really complicated too if it's a substance abuse disorder that's leading to those financial requests. And I think we all know family or friends who are terrified that their loved one is actually going to die if they don't give them money. Whether it's that they're homeless or they actually need drugs, because they become so physically dependent. So those are even more challenging and nuanced.
It's such a difficult fantasy to break. Like, if I don't do this, something worse will happen. And the reality is something worse might happen whether or not you do anything. And you can help a family member in lots of different ways. You can say, come over, I will make you dinner. Or if you need a place to stay for a night, you can do that.
Right, crash on my couch,
Right,
absolutely.
or I can drive you to work so you can save some money for the bus. Like, there are ways of helping without actually giving money.
So how do we all, I think that I often say, I feel as if ageism is sort of this thing that we don't talk about a lot that really permeates our society. And because I think it crosses all, racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, gender, it crosses over all of those boundaries. And so I think sometimes we don't give it its due. We don't really acknowledge the harm that it does. How can we all sort of be allies and help older adults given this really rapidly changing landscape around digital literacy and all those things that are really complicated for folks that are older?
I think that's actually such a complicated question. I feel like that should be a separate episode of how to combat ageism.
True. I sort of steeped it in something that, that's fair.
I feel like, a lot of times we have an ism because we might be afraid of something. So I think young people have ageism because they're afraid of getting older, because there's lots of things that can be scary about getting old. I remember my parents saying, like, don't get old, you're going to have all these pains and you're going to have this. And as I get older, I'm like, oh my God, why isn't my back better? So absolutely, there's some things that can be scary about getting older. Like perimenopause was never talked about. There's all this stuff. There's also, I think, great things about getting older, like having more knowledge and being able to do more things sometimes.
Being more comfortable in your skin. Yeah, for sure.
If your back doesn't hurt. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think, people in general kind of need more grace and compassion towards everyone. And I think because there's kind of this anger in the zeitgeist, it's really hard to have that. It's hard for people to calm down. Like I said, like it's hard to calm your nervous system down when you're constantly being angered by something. So I think everyone needs a little more calm in their life to have compassion towards people.
Absolutely. And I think, I guess the thing that I would say as we sort of close down is check on your neighbors, check on, call your aging parents every week and check in, ask questions, ask them what they've been up to, ask if they've been on the computer. I know I talk to my parents weekly, and they know to ask us about things. They know to ask my sister and I about, what do you think of this? Should I do this? And so it's having open conversations, having relationships. And then there are people who don't have family around to help out. So it's just really important to keep your eye on those that are around you.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Brooke, for enlightening us about this really important topic. And everybody have a great day. Thanks so much for listening.
This concludes today's podcast. We're always looking for new ideas, so feel free to reach out to Judy Raper, Associate Dean of Community Engagement at Greenfield Community College at 413-775-1819. If you have an idea you'd love to share. Special thanks to the creators of Backyard Oasis, Denise Schwartz, Chad Fuller, Dennis Lee, and Christine Copeland. Have a great day.